Nick Recker,
Hey,
thanks for joining me today.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Any family? Anything we should know about Nick Recker?
I have family. I enjoy long walks on the beach. I enjoy friends without hangups. No, I think my family is probably the most important thing to me. I have the privilege of being married for 22 years now, and my wife and I have 3 daughters, which is, as a guy who had 5 brothers, that's different. And then my brothers have only had daughters too. So we're getting pretty good at being girl dads. But yeah, wife, 3 daughters. Matt, we recently had chickens. We now are chicken farmers.
Wow.
Yep. I have eggs with me, probably some in my pocket that I can share with you later. I feel like there's eggs everywhere now. We have 4 dogs and have lived in Cincinnati our whole lives. I grew up here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and have really enjoyed raising my family here.
It sounds like you must live on a farm, Nick, with 4 dogs, 3 daughters, chickens.
I think there's some guinea pigs somewhere also, but it's actually not a farm. But we still get to enjoy those things anyway in the neighborhood we live in, and our neighbors are happy to have the eggs.
Wow, that's great. How old are your daughters, Nick?
So my oldest is 20, middle daughter is 18, and my youngest is just turning 16. So I just got to teach the last one how to drive, which was a fun experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've so far successfully trained all 3 of them, so I'm proud of that.
That's fantastic. So, Nick, I understand that you have a pretty long entrepreneurial history. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah.
Where did entrepreneurship start for you, Nick?
I think the earliest moment I could describe something happening to me as entrepreneurship was actually riding the Metro bus to school. So I had the privilege of going to St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. And if you're from Cincinnati, you know that we don't ask where you go to college. We ask, where did you go to high school, which is kind of a weird Cincinnati thing. But,
That's right.
So for all my Cincinnati watchers, St. Xavier. But I had to take the Metro bus to school. And I remember the ride was unnecessarily long because we had to stop everywhere except St. X on the way to school. And there was this one part of the drive where we would drive through this business park. And I remember seeing these big buildings and wondering what was in those businesses. And I just had this vision of what it would be like to own a business and run a business. And I really can't describe it any differently than that. I just every morning would drive by and think, I can own a business someday. And I didn't know much else about it. So that was like the earliest memory. After high school, went on to college for a little bit, and then ultimately left college to start my first business. But it was very much accidental. I didn't have a plan to start a business. At the time, I was attending a university, and I had a job as a student technician in the IT department, which was funny because I didn't know IT and didn't want a job. So both of those things were sort of happenstance. But as I got into it and had the opportunity to work under some really cool people that took time to mentor me, which was, I think, the first time I realized how important mentorship is, but I had a knack for it, and I really started to enjoy IT. My first software program I learned about was called Norton Ghost, and it sounds cool. I thought I was like Harry Potter showing up to these professors' offices, and I was going to ghost their computer. And they
Sound like a hacker or something.
It was pretty cool.
Very cool.
It was cool beyond my years.
It was the 90s.
It literally was the 90s. So anyway, I got into IT that way. And through a bunch of other circumstances, had the opportunity to apply for a job as an IT manager, for which I was grossly unqualified. And I was given the opportunity to do it, and through hard work and just some gifting and natural gifts, I was able to figure out how to do IT, and that's how it all started. So I left that, started helping people with their home computers. Remember the gateway boxes, the big cow boxes? Boy, I was unpacking a lot of those.
I remember the color coding diagrams that you'd pull out so what went in which port.
You got it. So that's how I got into it. And from there, I really realized as I started to work with one client in particular, who was a physician who was just starting his practice, I realized how powerful IT was to business. And again, this was the late 90s. I started my business in 2002 officially, but was sort of doing independent work before that. And I'd never made that connection. And when it clicked, how much what I was doing could help help grow that business, in his case, a physician practice. It was kind of an exciting moment. That's when the first business idea was born.
Great. So what did that business idea turn into?
So the very first business was called Path Forward IT. It's an IT managed service provider, which are known as MSPs. And it served only physician practices, which was kind of unique. Like healthcare in itself is unique, But even within that, we just serve these independent physician practices. And so our why, our very early why in the 2000s was to help these independent practices stay independent. At the time, there was a lot of consolidation with hospitals absorbing those groups, and the entrepreneur physicians that wanted to run these groups, they were as passionate about their businesses as I was. And so our whole why was like, let's help level the playing field for these guys technologically so they can provide the same level of care. And that was a period of rapid evolution in healthcare with the digitization of records, all the new medical imaging that was coming out. So again, often in business, luck plays a part, and we just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So Path Forward IT grew into an MSP serving those physician practices nationally. And we are privileged to continue to do that today.
That's great. Yeah, I do remember some of that digitization of things like electronic healthcare.
Yeah.
Or electronic health records.
Yeah, that's
right?
exactly right.
The whole meaningful use thing was big.
Geez. Yes.
Sounds like that rings a bell. What other types of unique needs did you see from an IT standpoint for healthcare providers at the time?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, well, this is sort of an IT managed service provider thing, but we're all always looking for non-traditional recurring revenue, right? Our core business is providing IT support to small, medium-sized, and lower enterprise customers. And you want to build a business that's based on providing a predictable scope of services. And because there are so many IT providers out there, to differentiate, it's great when you can provide something that adds value to that business, but maybe isn't like just traditional IT. So in 2014, we actually started a patient contact center. So believe it or not, we started answering the phone calls of the medical practices we served. That was a fun day at the office. It was like, go back to a bunch of engineers. It's like, how do you guys feel about scheduling patients? So that turned into its own business. And so eventually that split off into an independent business that still runs today. We also had the opportunity to develop a software product that we'd sold to physician practices. So my entrepreneurial journey kind of started with Path Forward IT and grew into two businesses focused on serving that exact same client base. And through that, what we really understood about physician practices in particular is that understanding your customers and market is really, really important to providing great service. And it's probably a lot like how physicians specialize. It seems like there's a specialty for everything that ails us. It's kind of similar in IT. I think the more time an IT provider takes to understand that end market, the better that support's going to fit for them.
That makes sense. Now, do I understand correctly that you're involved with other MSPs now that are serving customers and verticals in addition to healthcare providers?
Yeah. So Path Forward IT now has expanded to serve any industry. Healthcare is still a core competency for sure, but they evolved to serve manufacturing and engineering firms and chemical companies and all sorts of really amazing businesses. But what happened for me, part of my journey, Matt, was as an entrepreneur who, you spend so much time thinking it's not going to work. When you're an entrepreneur, it's kind of surreal. Like you start with no customers and no dollars, and then suddenly you have some customers, and then you hire somebody, and it's like, holy cow, I have an employee. And then there's more people, and it's like, but there's this sort of like, I've heard it described as imposter syndrome, like where you just sort of feel like you're not supposed to be there. And that was something as an entrepreneur I know I struggled with, and I know others that I've talked to who've been on similar journeys struggled with. And so with that sense of imposter syndrome, what ends up happening, Matt, is you can kind of perceive maybe barriers that don't exist. And so for me in particular, as an IT service provider, we started getting a lot of contact from people that were interested in purchasing my business in the mid-teens. So 2015-ish was really when I remember it consciously, and it just kept ramping up. And like any good business owner, I would certainly check it out and explore it. And there were some really good options. And that was really about the time that private equity started to get very interested in the IT managed service provider space. So to answer your question, in 2021, I started a business called Blue Alliance. And the vision behind Blue Alliance was there a space in the marketplace for a completely founder-led MSP platform? And that's not to say that there aren't great options out there. I just felt like there was an opportunity for me to create something unique, something that I can envision selling my business to all those days ago. And that was one of those moments when, you kind of knock down that imposter syndrome barrier and you're like, you know what, if they can do it, I can do it. And so that's how that started. So in 2021, we purchased our first MSP, who's our founding partner. And we've been able to grow it since then.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've spent time with a lot of entrepreneurs, Nick. I'm an entrepreneur myself.
Mm-hmm.
That imposter syndrome that you talk about, man, that's a real thing.
It is.
I hear it all the time. I think it's very easy to feel lonely as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you feel like, am I the only one who's trying to do something like this? And if you pick your head up and look around, you realize you're not, but it's easy to feel that way, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we're so blessed to live in a country where you can become an entrepreneur. I mean, think about my situation. I walked out of a job and said, sure, I can help you. And, there you go. But the flip side of that is that isolation feels real. The stress is real. Yeah. The responsibilities are real. And so, you got to find that connectivity to people that have been there, that are a little further along on that journey to help break that isolation. Absolutely.
I'm interested to learn more about your approach with Blue Alliance, because as I understand it, in the MSP space in particular, there's kind of a few different models for M&A, right? So you have the highly integrated model where businesses that are acquired just kind of all fold up into one brand. There's a disintegrated model where, a business may be acquired, but operationally very little changes. The identity of business doesn't change. And then I suppose, like in all other types of markets, there's probably some in-between point, mm-hmm. right? Where does Blue Alliance fit into that sort of spectrum?
Yeah. Well, I think before I answer that, I think it's important to know that MSPs number in the thousands. I saw a statistic that I'm not going to be able to quote, but it said after one of the years of really active M&A, I want to say maybe like 2020 or 2021, there were more MSPs at the end of that year than at the beginning when it started. So MSPs are something that are constantly being started. They're often founded by folks like me that were technical, that maybe have an entrepreneurial flair. So it's a very big marketplace. And so because of that, there are a lot of opportunities for different flavors of partnership. And so to your point, on one end of the spectrum is what I would think of as like fully integrated. Fully integrated would mean you have a highly successful MSP that chooses to partner with other MSPs, and through that partnership, the MSP that's coming into the organization essentially gets fully integrated. So they adopt the brand, they become part of that org chart, they, in every practical sense, they become part of that business. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. That's sort of the one side of it. And that's really what started, I think, in my view at least, what started when the MSP roll-up started happening. That was kind of like we'll call it V1. As things evolved, you started to see this idea of a platform, emerge. And I think that's another question, is like, well, what's a platform? Well, there's no standard definition, but essentially the idea was you had some degree of community that you were in as a partner. So when, as an MSP owner, when you joined a platform, you were now in a community with other independently operating brands, but yet still part of the same family. And so the other extreme of fully integrated is what I would call a disintegrated platform. So MSPs that live in the same ecosystem, they have some shared corporate services, but largely still operate as independent entities. So they still have their own payroll, they still have their own purchasing, they still run their own mm-hmm. PSA, which is the software that we use in the MSP world. And then somewhere in the middle, you're absolutely correct. There are some flavors of that. Sometimes what you see is maybe they're going to end up fully integrated, but it's a much, much longer roadway. So I would call it almost like an integration queue. And then there's others where they do some additional, what I would call sort of shared service offerings. So Blue in particular, what my vision was that we have an opportunity as operators to be stronger together. And so that was kind of the lens, there's nothing wrong with what other people are doing. And I love the MSP space. We're such a collegial group of people, even when we're in competitive situations. I think we're one of the classiest industries out there. And so I think the same is true even for acquirers. There's a lot of really good people in this industry trying to do really good things. So even within that, Matt, you end up with a lot of variability on sort of what really adds value. And there's two ways to look at that from an investment standpoint. So someone's helping invest in that business, how much value is a decision adding? And then the second piece is what's the value to the entrepreneur? And that's what really drove me, was this idea of creating freedom for the entrepreneur.
Well, that all sounds really nice, Nick. I mean, I know it's great industry. And how is Blue Alliance different
Yeah.
Really? Like which of those models do you find yourself most aligned with? And how does Blue Alliance differentiate itself from other acquiring entities or platforms?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say of that spectrum, we are definitely, I think, kind of a new category or an emerging category. I won't claim that we're completely unique, but this idea of a fully integrated platform. So what does that mean? So when I think of myself as an entrepreneur, there are things about my job, Matt, that I like, right? They're my power alleys. It's the area where I get passion and I enjoy it. And there are parts of being an entrepreneur that are absolutely not fun. And candidly, I'm not good at them. That's how we thought about Blue Alliance. What does it look like if you take a best-in-class MSP and bring them into an environment through shared governance where they've got one finance team, one CFO who's handling everything from treasury, invoicing, financial planning and analysis, where you could wake up at the end of the month and have reports that show you how your business did, not reports you have to go run and you're going to candidly forget to run a month later. What does it look like to have a chief people officer who's managing recruiting, talent development, training across a host of family MSPs, where inside that ecosystem, you're all benefiting from that? You could never, any of you independently could never afford the caliber of talent that we can use at the Blue Alliance level, but as a group, we can be stronger together. Another example is revenue operations. When we welcome a partner in that has a healthy business development team and sales team, great. They don't have to change it. Like, we think of this as like freedom within a framework. These are the things we can help with. If we have an MSP partner who's killing it and they've got a great sales team and everything's going great, it isn't broke. We're not going to try to fix it. That level of customization, Matt, is part of why Blue Alliance is unique. We have an endpoint that we want our partners to get to, but there's flexibility and freedom based on what they bring. And then this is where I think it gets really exciting. If an organization comes in with something that is truly unique or best in class, we have this idea of a freedom to grow playbook, which is kind of our term for it, but it's basically like our best practice playbook. The best of us ends up there. And that's accessible to all of our partners. That is really different than a disintegrated platform where I might have a meeting with one of my partner MSPs, but we don't use the same accounting team. Like, we don't have the same marketing folks backing us. Like, we can collaborate, but I can't really benefit from the work you've done directly. In our model, you can literally just use what they did because it's the same shared business team that did it. And I'm just scratching the surface on some of these things, but hopefully that helps kind of explain how I feel like we're different. You still have the autonomy to run as an independent brand, and your team still feels like they're part of that brand, and they are. The customers still feel that. But now there's all this extra horsepower that's coming that you're both governing, but also only fractionally, paying for, which I think is a huge difference.
Yeah, I hear you saying that there is a lot of flexibility in the process. It's not a one-size-fits-all integration plan. You also mentioned that in the longer term, you have a vision for what success looks like in something closer to an end state. Can you describe that a little bit more? How do you know if Blue Alliance were to acquire a new MSP next month? What does success look like for a successful integration? So
I think this is one of the hardest parts about being a CEO, is that you're trying to manage very distinct stakeholder interests. And so when you ask me that question, I think of three stakeholders. And I use this analogy with our team. I kind of think of a triangle. And you've got the customer at one point on the triangle. You've got the business, the company, at another point. Then you've got the employees at a point. And if you can make decisions that hit the center of that triangle where all the stakeholder needs are balanced, you're winning as a leader. That is how I try to look at success. And I'll give you an example, Matt. Like, if we welcome a new partner in, and through that process, we discover that the employees of that team are underpaid. Maybe not the fault of the entrepreneur. It may not be, malicious. It's just sometimes small businesses just maybe don't have a good sense of market pay or whatever the case is. So we see that. So that dot is moved away from the employee and it's moved more towards the company and the customer. What might that look like? Well, the margins are fantastic. That's good for the company. Maybe prices are low. That's good for the customer, but the employees aren't being compensated fairly, right? So using that little example, like, what we try to do is move that dot back. And that could be any time. Sometimes that's just too much towards the customer. Pricing's too low, so we can't pay our employees and the company's not making money. We got to move that dot to the center. So in my mind, success for our integration plan is, are we adding value day one? Like, did we bring something to the table day one? Not 6 months after we make a partnership, like right away. A good example of that is we have a community service program. So every employee within Blue Alliance, within all of our MSPs, they get an extra week of paid time off on top of their regular paid time off. The catch is they have to use it in the service of others. So we're trying to stimulate people to serve, because we're a service business, and we all know that you've all heard the you get more than you give kind of thing. Like, that's something we can do right away. Like, so we can welcome a new MSP and introduce that program very quickly and add value. But at the end of that process, it's, did we balance the stakeholder interests? Were the customers treated well and protected? We should see that no customer turnover. And we've had that success. We've had almost virtually no customer turnover through our partnerships. Wow. Employee turnover.
That's very rare in integration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do not want employee turnover, certainly not turnover that's related to the integration. Sometimes turnover happens. Somebody outgrows an organization. That's normal. I'm talking about someone choose to leave because of something the integration did. That shouldn't happen. So that's how we sort of measure that success at the end.
That's great. I love what you were saying about a service program that you offer. I've never heard of anything like that. So you're actually offering all Blue Alliance MSP employees the ability to serve their community somehow, and they're paid for that time?
Yeah. And this is an interesting question. I'm sure one of the topics we'll get to is private equity's role in our industry. So I'll save the commentary there, but this is why picking the right investment partner is so important. So this is a very expensive program. So, we're a service business, and we ultimately make money by serving customers through our engineers, our technical services. And so the more time you have off, right, there's a corresponding cost to billable revenue. I mean, it's not
It's an opportunity cost. It's not billable.
And so for us, though, we started this program years ago, and we really started adding fuel to this program after COVID. So, prior to COVID, most MSPs, like most businesses, were very much presence. They were, certainly you had national MSPs, but very office focused. But of all the jobs that can work remote, most of the jobs within an MSP can be remote very effectively. And candidly, there's a lot of benefits to the employee. So after COVID, in our businesses, we've allowed that flexibility. So some of our MSPs are totally virtual. We actually have one in our family that started virtual pre-COVID, like 2008. They never had an office. And so that's an example of they had a best practice that is now in our Freedom to Grow playbook. Hey, you want to know how to manage a team well without an office? These guys have it figured out. So for us, after COVID, for the people that were used to being in the office, what we realized was that culture was like a battery. And COVID kind of unplugged it. And so companies that had a really healthy culture had a lot of runway. Like, they had time to figure out, like, wow, how do we interact with our team now? Yeah. Companies that had an unhealthy culture, that battery might have been really short, and things went south quickly. We had a great culture, and so we had some time. But what we realized was we underestimated the benefit of the incidental contact of seeing somebody at the coffee maker, or grabbing lunch randomly, or walk by meetings. You're just walking by somebody's office and you have a great interaction. And like, when all that went away, it's like, okay, we got to push back against this. And so this program really took life when we realized the utility of bringing people together, serving others outside of the workplace. Like, it's not the only thing we do, but it is part of how we try to bring that relational connectivity to our teams. And yes, we have a person on our team whose sole job is to curate service opportunities. That was the other thing we found.
Wow.
You tell people they can take time to serve. A lot of them don't know how to use it. So we curate company mission trips. We partner with Habitat for Humanity in different cities. We do a trip to rural Kentucky where we do organic farming for a week and get people out on their farms working in country where they just live differently. And you just sort of get a different sense than someone who sits in front of a computer all day. And it's been really, really cool to see the results of that.
That's very cool. Now, I want to get down to brass tacks a little bit more on integration.
Let's do it.
Okay. I've been through a couple of integrations. I know a lot of companies talk a good game when it comes to their integration planning, their integration resources. And maybe this is my own baggage coming out here, Nick, but maybe I've got some battle wounds. But I've been through integrations where I realized after the fact that all the resources were put on the front end.
Yeah.
into attracting, that target business to be acquired.
Yeah.
And very few resources, if any at all, were actually dedicated to integration. And a lot of it was just left up to the business owner or the former business owner to figure out how to make it work. And so I want to push you on that a little bit. Can you talk to me about what your post-acquisition integration resources really look like at Blue Alliance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And again, as a platform that was founded by entrepreneurs, I mean, my founding partners and I are all people who started businesses and built those businesses. And we tried to use the lens of what would we want? Well, I'll tell you what we wanted. There's really nothing wrong with taking a business you've built and partnering with someone and having an equity transaction. That's perfectly fine. That's the whole reason people go into business. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the amount of misalignment that happens before you get to what's called like the LOI stage, right? Where people who are interested really start putting pen to paper. The amount of misalignment that happens up front, like that is the most salesy part of the process, right? The potential suitor is really trying to portray what life is going to be like in a positive way. And so there's a tendency to sort of say a lot of really great, fun sounding things. And there's a tendency to sort of be light on specifics. And just the mechanics of what an LOI is, Matt, unfortunately, that there's not a lot in there about integration. It's really the deal terms. And so you got all these great conversations. Then you get this letter that's talking about deal terms. And then later it's like, well, wait a minute. Don't you remember all the things we were talking about? So what we did was we created a process called Blueprint to Freedom. And I talked about this idea of freedom for operators and entrepreneurs. It's a pre-LOI process where we interview the stakeholders, the shareholders, whoever wants to be a part of it. It's different for every business. And through that interview process, we reflect back to them in the form of a written deliverable what we heard and what specifically we're going to do in the integration plan. How are we going to customize things for them? How might timing change based on their needs? And that's something that we give them before we get to that LOI stage. And it should be like a mirror if we did it right. Like they should read it and think to themselves, like, that's exactly what I said. And these people understand it. Now, we can't always do everything they want, but this is where it gets real. Like if we can't do something, well, we're not going to put it in writing, right? Like, so it gives the entrepreneur, the operator, the stakeholder who might be transacting their business, it gives them a chance to say, you said that, are we going to put it here? And, while I think many people have really ethical acquisition processes, to my knowledge, nobody's going to that extent up front to make sure there's alignment. And then your question was after the fact. The blueprint creates the team that will deliver the integration, and those folks stay on board all throughout that process. We call that part of the process Foundations to Freedom.
Nick, I love this Blueprint to Freedom idea. I've never heard of something that detailed being laid out prior to an LOI even, or concurrent with the LOI, but
typically
pre-acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the next step then? Once somebody signs that LOI, we're underway. What's next in the integration pathway?
Yeah. So having only gone through that once myself as an entrepreneur, it is a little shocking. Like the due diligence process is what it's called. It's confirmatory diligence. So essentially it's the opportunity for the acquirer to really just confirm everything that was presented. And it feels pokey, as my kids would say, like when they think things that are uncomfortable, it feels pokey. It is a difficult process. There's a lot of information and you learn a lot about your own business that sometimes isn't good. Like, you find things that you just didn't know about. I certainly did. But there's a responsibility to the investors, right? Like that's what made it click for me is like when I realized that they were doing this not because they were trying to get a gotcha. It's like they have investors that have invested in them, private equity groups, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to those investors. So that happens, and that's not fun for anybody. I don't know that part of the process is a lot different in any acquiring situation. We're very high touch. We assign a dedicated point person that's like your quarterback. If you're working through a broker or an investment banker, we'll coordinate with them. So we try to, again, be empathetic and just really make sure we're being upfront and transparent. But the fun part, Matt, starts at the end of that. So you get to that process, and most of the time people get there, right? If you go under LOI, hopefully you've done the work up front to align. You get to that finish line, and it's a lot of fun. So that's when we have a process that we call Foundations to Freedom. That's essentially our internal term for our integration plan.
Okay.
And unique to us is that we actually start that process during the due diligence. Now, if I'm the seller, like that's a little bit of extra work in the sense that like I have to make sure I've got some time availability to talk to us about that. But things we're thinking about are helping those owners think through the communication plan. It's a big announcement. How do they tell their team? When do they tell their team?
Oh, yeah.
What does a celebration look like right after that close so that we're welcoming people in with booklets and with FAQs and information? Like, let's help them understand what's in it for them, what is going to change and what's not going to change, because that's just so important that they get that information quickly. That's just a quick example of what we can do even before a transaction is closed. But then that Foundations of Freedom plan, that's essentially the governing plan. And when you're finished, you essentially reach whatever our then current version of Freedom to Grow is. Like that's the endpoint of Foundations to Freedom, is you are now integrated when you have achieved the best of us, if you will, what every other MSP in the family is doing.
I see. So pre-acquisition, we've got blueprint to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's on the table. Know what to expect.
Yep.
Foundations to freedom is really the bulk of your integration plan.
That's correct.
So tell me more about this freedom to grow. So this is I think what I hear you saying is this is the longer term success model that we're all shooting for together as sort of a combined entity. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And if the Blue Alliance business plan was simply just welcoming new partners, Freedom to Grow would be unnecessary. And honestly, something like that doesn't exist in a lot of our contemporaries in the marketplace. For us though, being a group of operators that are running the platform, we want to keep getting better together. Like we want to be that iron sharpens iron, like personal trainer to each other. And when we make a decision that we decide is a best practice, it moves to that Freedom to Grow playbook and becomes part of how we operate. It becomes part of our ethos. So an example of that might be, this is just a really simple one. Often entrepreneurs are so busy serving customers, they forget to serve their own team. One of the things we always see in employee engagement surveys, we don't communicate enough. So in Freedom to Grow, we talk about like every CEO of one of our MSPs hosts a monthly town hall for their team. It's a best practice. It is how we are going to run our businesses. We're going to make sure employees have a direct report and they have regular check-ins with that direct report. It seems simple, but it's something that a lot of businesses forget to do. We get busy, but it's a best practice. So it lives in Freedom to Grow. So when we say someone's fully integrated, it's when we can look section by section and see evidence of them now living up to that standard that we have collectively adopted. It's like it's happening with them, not to them. We're not forcing people to do things. And we're open-minded enough that when we welcome a partner, we're welcoming in one this year that I'm very excited because they're going to level all of us up. Like they have some things figured out that we are currently not doing as well. And so we're open-minded to be like, we got to update the playbook because this is better and better together. That's the whole point, is if you're not willing to learn from each other, then you're just parking, businesses in the same family and just kind of counting on them to attend a pep rally once a year and get better that way. And I just don't think that's enough. Like it wasn't what I wanted as a business owner. I wanted to be part of a shared governance model where together we were deciding how to be better.
So Freedom to Grow, to borrow from an old phrase, it's the rising tide that's floating all boats.
That's exactly right.
So when a new MSP comes in and you realize, oh my gosh, they're doing this piece of the business better than any of the rest of us are, that gets added to the Freedom to Grow playbook, and now we're leveling up everyone.
You got it. And that's why for us, one, it's fun because that business gets to come and be the expert and coach and train the rest of us how to do it. Our team at Blue Alliance, the Blue Alliance level, they are ultimately the stewards of that, right? So whatever stakeholder would end up owning that, they're responsible for building that into something that's replicable, scalable, cost-effective, like we build it. And then that becomes the new standard. So the way to think about it, Matt, is a business we would welcome today in 2024, their finish line is going to be different than a business we welcome in 2025 because that finish line will have been further. And so our integration team, you asked about that support, they're constantly helping our partners because a partner like Path Forward IT that was one of the founding partners, Path Forward IT is going to be leveled up this year thanks to one of the sister companies in Blue Alliance. And so they need that same level of integration, support, and change management that a brand new partner might. So for us, we don't see integration as like a one-time thing that we check the box and we're done. We see it as part of a continuous improvement cycle. I gotta think of a better name than integration, but it really is like it's getting you to standard and then helping you stay up to whatever our new standard is.
So there's been a lot of M&A activity in the MSP space over the last several years. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but I believe 2023 in particular was a down year for a lot of reasons. But all indications are for 2024 and beyond, growth rates are back up, a lot of activity there. Certainly private equity groups have been front runners in, driving up valuations of these businesses, bringing a lot of cash to the table. And it kind of seems like when I talk to people about private equity in general, I get typically one of two responses. Like, private equity is wonderful. I had a huge payday because of private equity, or private equity is the devil. They destroyed my business. And it seems that there can be some pretty polar opposite opinions about private equity. So I guess my question for you, Nick, is how should we be thinking about private equity? Is Blue Alliance a private equity group? And if not, how is it dissimilar?
Yeah.
So talk more about that.
Yeah, no, I think so. As an entrepreneur, right, I started with no business, no customers, no idea what I was doing. And as I grew, I was able to self-finance the business. What does that mean? It just means that as we grew, I was able to hire more people. I was able to procure more space. I was blessed to have some family help along the way, which again, growing a business is hard. It's hard to do in a vacuum. And many people don't have access to family members that might be willing to help with that. Some people might try to use commercial banks. Don't even get me started on this, but I think commercial banks and entrepreneurs, they've changed their lending standards so much. It's almost impossible to get real meaningful help from a commercial bank. And if you do, it's usually not helpful enough. So if you're an entrepreneur, no one empathizes with this challenge more than me. And I would encourage entrepreneurs to grow your businesses as big as you can, as long as everything's healthy, right? Think about those stakeholders. If the customer, the employee, and the company are doing well, try to grow it as long as you can on your own. Like, why wouldn't you? And that's what I did. And so for 20 years, I built and grew businesses. I've had the privilege of employing thousands of people and serving thousands of customers. And I'm very proud of that. For Blue Alliance in particular, Matt, the business plan for Blue Alliance requires capital. Some business plans do. And for me, when I went out to look at the marketplace, I think private equity has done a lot of wonderful things for the MSP world. And I think they get a bad rap sometimes. That's my perspective. I think they get more bad press than is deserved. Now, like anything, there are good private equity companies and there are bad ones. I mean, there's good MSPs and there's bad ones. There's good podcast hosts and there's bad ones. So it's like anything. There's always an outlier. But by and large, I think private equity is run by a lot of great people, and they're trying to be good stewards of the people that have invested in them. And they're trying to help level up the businesses that they're investing in to be better than they were. So I think writ large, like, it's been a really good thing. What I think has happened is private equity investors, understandably, are not operators typically. They don't understand necessarily the nuances of the businesses they invest in. And Matt, that could be true of anything. It's not even just MSPs. So where you hear the horror stories, it's where a well-intentioned private equity investor made or led decisions that led to those stakeholders being damaged. So you might experience much higher than expected customer churn after a partnership because they jacked up prices too quickly, or maybe unnecessarily. They just didn't need to, and they did it anyway. You might see higher than normal employee turnover because the integration plan was clumsy and careless, and people didn't feel known and nurtured. And so they're like, I spent my life in a small business. I knew the owner. I felt known and nurtured. And now I feel like I work for Megacorp. I'm out, So I think that's where you get the horror stories, is just clumsiness. And I think it's gotten a lot better. I think the private equity companies that are actively investing in MSPs have learned a lot of those lessons and are largely doing very good work. For me personally, I wanted to find a private equity partner that was, in some ways, kind of the anti-private equity partner, meaning that I wanted to find a PE partner that had a real bent towards the entrepreneur. And that's what I was able to find. So Blue Alliance is private equity backed. We partnered with an organization called Prairie Capital. They're out of Chicago, Illinois. Worked with them. I actually met one of their principals back in 2017. And this guy, just every time he was in the area, he would take me to lunch, no expectations, built a relationship with me. There was never any pressure. And that stuck with me because it's kind of like how I do business. Like, we're not high pressure in our MSP sales environment. We're not high pressure in any place. And so he focused on a relationship and nurtured that relationship for 7 years, essentially, before I got to the place where I was interested in partnering with private equity. Now, I still ran a process, and I worked with a person who helped advise me, a company that helped advise me, and there were multiple people involved. But ultimately, we ended up going with this group, Prairie, and the relationship that I had because their whole ethos is about business building. They're in many ways, like I think of us to our Blue Alliance partners, they want to be thought partners. They want to challenge you. They want to help you do better, right? So sometimes as entrepreneurs, we can be, maybe a little slow to do some of the things we know we need to do. It's great. It's like having a personal trainer for business. But also they bring the expertise in the capital markets. How do you scale responsibly? How do you make acquisitions and do it in a way that is going to be repeatable, that's going to protect those stakeholders? So I personally think private equity in the MSP space is great. It's why MSP owners own valuable businesses. And I think we have a lot to be grateful for to the private equity investors that have chosen our marketplace. We have a great marketplace and we run a lot of great businesses. So it's a good equation, right? You got good investors and you've got good business owners and operators, and that's created a lot of value. So all that to say, Matt, in my view, if I'm an MSP owner and I'm growing, at some point, if I'm thinking like a shareholder, at some point, I'm going to want to transact my business. And I think that the fact that private equity has been as interested in our marketplace is a good thing.
Something that I heard you mention earlier, Nick, was that if you're an MSP owner, just keep running that business. Grow it as much as you can for as long as you can. And I'm wondering what your perspective is from the standpoint of an owner of a privately held MSP. Mm-hmm. How do you know when you've reached a point that maybe you would be better served by bringing in external resources, whether that be joining a platform like Blue Alliance or another one, versus continuing to run that business on your own? Have you found any sort of best practice kind of guidance for those owners to know when maybe they've reached that tipping point?
I think, Matt, I have to lean in my own experience as an entrepreneur to answer this question. I think it's a combination of things. I think business owners, especially entrepreneurs, we can be really bad at managing the role of shareholder and CEO, and we often mix those roles together to our peril. A shareholder owns a business, an asset, and they should expect that business to increase in value. A CEO is in many ways an employee whose job it is to manage that asset, to produce greater returns. When you mix those roles, sometimes you settle for things, you don't make tough decisions you need to make, you're not as aggressive about really articulating a growth plan. Like, you can kind of mix them together and then what you end up with is kind of underperformance at the end of the day. And for me, that was certainly a factor. Like, was I really getting the input and the advice and the outside perspective I needed the bigger the business got? I wasn't sure that I was. And then the other thing is you got to keep an eye on the market. And I think that's the other part. And that's the more relevant part, I think, right now. There's a lot of really healthy MSPs out there that are doing really good work, but our marketplace is changing. The AI buzzword is exhausting, but it's undeniable. It's going to change how IT services are performed. It's going to change how IT services are provisioned. It's going to change everything. We don't fully understand what that looks like. The compliance and regulatory marketplace is changing. It's largely conventional wisdom at this point that MSPs will face some form of future regulation from the government. What's that going to look like? It's just the needs of businesses and the needs of recruiting talent are getting harder. Like, it's harder to do that. So for me, Matt, what it was I was looking at this great industry I'm in that's growing, double-digit growth in the overall marketplace that we serve, all good. but also some headwinds of, am I really equipped to do this alone? And why would I want to? And so for me and the founding partners of Blue Alliance, that's kind of what pushed us over the edge. It was like, yeah, we can keep going alone. We don't need to sell. And that's the kind of business we love to work with, is somebody who doesn't have to sell their business. They're choosing to. Those are partners. That's what I want. I want people that are going to go on this adventure with us. I want people that, if they may be at a place in their life where they're ready to transition the business and they want it stewarded the way they ran. Like, those are the people I want to talk to. They're choosing to transact the business for whatever reason they are. Maybe it's a life stage. Maybe it's to level up the business. But those are people that we align with from a values perspective, and I think should consider it.
Well, Nick, it sounds like you found a great partner in Prairie. Practically speaking, does that mean that Prairie Capital is now running Blue Alliance? How involved are they operationally?
It's a good question. I think that's a question as an entrepreneur. Before I partnered with private equity, I was really curious about, like, do they, there's so much activity in our space. And you hear these horror stories. It's like, do they run the business? Do you have to ask permission for everything? How does that work? Every private equity company is different, Matt. So there's no one answer that works well. Some are larger and they have what are called operating teams, which is a dedicated team of people that really do partner with the business and sort of help operate it. And that's not even necessarily bad. Like, to be clear, like, there may be reasons that's the right kind of partnership for a business. So there's types like that. For Prairie, their model's a little bit different. They focus on founder, entrepreneur-led businesses. Prairie is typically, or I think always, is the first investment made in a business. So the first sort of outside investor, like an institutional investor. Those are two very important things. And they look for, so basically, an entrepreneur and a marketplace that they like. And then they partner. And they're absolutely thought partners. So they're here to help make sure me, as the founder and CEO of Blue Alliance, that I'm making decisions that are scalable. And that's what I wanted in a partner. Like, it is a lot of responsibility to run an organization. And if you're taking it seriously, you want outside input. But their role is advisory. Their role is governance. We operate the business. So the operator-led mantra of Blue Alliance is not just a headline. It's how we operate. So as an example of that, one of the things that was really important to my partners and I, when you have a family of MSPs, they need to be able to seamlessly back each other up. Like, it can't just be like before you were in the family, like where you had to, if you needed to send somebody, if you had an office in Atlanta and you didn't have a person down there and your partner did, they should be able to tap that resource without having to send each other invoices. They should be able to collaborate together. If one of the vendors that we're looking for, maybe a product that you're not authorized to sell, but one of your partners is, that should be a seamless transition where we can lean into each other as we scale. That's a part of how we design the platform. And that's an example of where we're just given a lot of freedom and trust as operators, as successful entrepreneurs, to build a platform that works for operators. So I love the thought partnership side of it. And that was a big part of what I sought, other than the capital. But in Prairie's particular model, they don't operate. They're more sort of advisory governance.
Now that you do have this private equity backing at Blue Alliance, Nick, I'm curious what that means for your own time frame. I believe, and I'm probably overgeneralizing a bit, but private equity groups tend to have about a 5 to 7 year time horizon before they're looking to do what private equity does, which is to maximize value at the next turn and, bring on other partners or whatever the plan is. Like, what does that mean for Blue Alliance in the future?
Well, so I think the first thing is that's another example, Matt, of where I would say a lot of entrepreneurs, and I would put myself in this boat before I really understood it, that feels like a negative. It's like, oh, well, they're only making short-term decisions. Well, they're only trying to maximize I think a lot of that's just bad press, or, again, there are certainly some outliers that will make bad decisions, but that's really not the goal of a private equity investor. If you think about investment is investment. It is choosing to place dollars in a business that is growing and appreciating in value for the eventual return of more than dollars than they put in. It's not a complicated concept. Generally speaking, I agree with you. I think private equity looks at that 5-year, 7-year horizon. From my perspective, as a 45-year-old, I'm still in the center of my career. I plan to be with Blue long after our partnership with Prairie transitions. Blue is being built so that a future investor doesn't have to change the model for it to work. That's very important to think about. If you are building a business and it's partially based on an acquisition strategy, which ours is. We certainly want our MSPs to grow independently, but we're also wanting to welcome new partners as a part of how we all get better together. The temptation for the next investor is to try to tweak something in the model to create value rather than just keep running the playbook, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I have been very deliberate, and Prairie has been very supportive of building a model at Blue that will not need to be tweaked to still be valuable to a future investor. Private equity groups, as I've heard it explained, they have different sizes of investment they want to make. So if you think of Prairie as kind of like AA ball, then there's maybe AAA and majors. Like there are funds that are billions of dollars. They're making investments in massive companies that every American has heard of, right? That's a different league of investor. Not good, not bad. It's just they have different structure, they have different focus, different expertise.
Different targets.
Prairie's focus is to help the entrepreneur build and scale their business to that next level. And I am very pleased to have them on that chapter of my journey. Now, when that part of the journey is complete, their typical process would be to return that money to their investors, which makes perfect sense. And so as the CEO of Blue Alliance and a significant owner of Blue Alliance, my goal will be to find a capital partner for that next leg of the journey. And we won't have to mess with the playbook. That's why I'm so excited about Blue. Being governed and managed by entrepreneurs, we understand the customer, we understand the employee, and we understand what needs to be true for this to be a good place to work and a good place to make a living. And so that's the goal. So we're happy to have Prairie as a partner. And I think that a lot of our contemporaries are in similar situations. There are MSP investments where they were earlier and you're starting to see private equity groups transition out and others transition in. And that's perfectly fine. And I think the stigma behind it, again, is largely unfair. I think it's a natural part of how it works. It's happened in many, many other industries very successfully, and I think it'll continue to happen successfully in the MSP industry.
So I know that some private equity platforms offer rollover equity. Mm-hmm. How does that factor into the Blue Alliance model? Is that something that you offer? Is it something that is required? What does that look like?
It's a great question, and I think it's one of our differentiators. We have a lot of flexibility there. If we kind of talk about these personas of MSP entrepreneurs, and so one of the personas we've talked about is this ambitious Abe, and the idea is this is somebody who's enjoying growing their business. They don't need to sell the business. There's still a lot left in the tank. That's a great example of somebody that's probably going to want to take some of the proceeds and roll it in and become co-investors with me and my partners because they're going to be there for the journey. And that makes a lot of sense. They believe in it. I believe in it. Most of my net worth is in Blue Alliance. I believe in it. So I think we'll see that with partners. Different than some other options, though, we don't require it. Like there's another persona, which we call Legacy Larissa, who might be ready to transition the business. Maybe they're at the end of their career and they've reached retirement and they're focused on finding a good home that'll steward it, protect the culture, protect the people. But their investments are elsewhere and they don't want to necessarily roll over equity. Perfectly fine. So we have tried to build that flexibility in, Matt, where people can do what makes sense based on where they are and what their needs are.
One of the reasons I was excited to talk to you, Nick, is that I would love for this recording to be able to help other entrepreneurs who might be considering a similar journey to the one that you've gone on. Now, as someone who has owned a number of businesses and owned those businesses outright yourself for 20 plus years, you had to be concerned at some level about what it would be like to all of a sudden have a boss, right? Yeah. To now be in a world where you are private equity backed. What has that been like? What's your temperature level day to day?
Yeah, well, definitely was curious. I think you'd have to be after being independent so long. I mean, I can only speak to my experience, Matt, but it's been great. It has been great. My kids always ask about business ownership stuff, and when I was completely independent, they're like, so they'd always be like, so you don't have a boss? And I'd always answer like, everybody has a boss, and the boss is the customer, and the boss is, I mean this in a figurative way. The boss is the employee. Like you're always serving someone if you're doing your job well as a leader. Leadership's about serving. So in that regard, if you think of it that way, it's really not different. You have different stakeholders that are there to help you. But that's what's been so great is like there's as much of that service coming to me as there is me coming to my team. So I've enjoyed it. It's been great. I have a thought partner. That isolation we talked about at the beginning, that's gone. Something comes up, I have people that will answer the call immediately and talk me through it, and it's collaborative and it's fun. Like, I mean, business is fun. Like when you get past all of the sleepless nights and all the stuff that goes into entrepreneurship, like at the end of the day, we're kind of doing this because it's fun. Like there's almost like an adrenaline aspect to it, right? So for me, it's been awesome because I've got people that are excited. They're pumped up about creating value for everyone, for all the stakeholders. So I've enjoyed it. Now, I will say, like to somebody who's listening that's never thought about this, you should do this if you want the intensity level to increase, right? And I did. I had been running a business independently. And so what do I mean by intensity level? It just means specifics, right? Like as an entrepreneur, oftentimes I would say like, well, that's something we should do. And now the follow-up question is, well, great. Well, when are we going to do it? And let's build a plan to do it. And it's like, yeah, we could do that right now. Whereas I would often find myself independently, like maybe having an idea or an observation and just sort of like not really setting a timeline or not being disciplined enough about what does that deliverable look like. And so in a way, it's been good for everybody. I think my team appreciates it because it just drives me to be a better, more accountable, more specific leader. So I've enjoyed it.
It's probably nice to not feel alone. You're no longer alone on Nick Island,
it's
right?
the best feeling ever. Yeah. And so you got to choose your partner carefully. And that's what I'd encourage my fellow entrepreneurs to do, whichever of those integration models is right for you, whether you're going fully integrated or you're going to try to become your own platform or you're going to partner with somebody like us, like whoever the stakeholder you're partnering with is, just make sure that compatibility is there. Because I think the worst horror stories I've heard are when there wasn't a core compatibility in values, goals, and then it's very difficult, and that's not what anybody wants. But that's my experience has been lovely.
You mentioned that in some ways, the intensity has dialed up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Specificity, expectations are there that maybe weren't there before. Have you found that there have been maybe some other areas where you're experiencing a little bit of relief?
Yeah, we talk about freedom a lot when we're talking to other entrepreneurs. There are parts of entrepreneurship that are not glamorous. They don't cover them on Shark Tank. It's just sort of, we have this success bias where we just focus as a society, we focus on the entrepreneur at the end. And we miss like this huge messy middle when you're building a business and it's just stressful and things don't go well and it's not linear. It's just problem, success, And so what I don't miss and where I feel like I've gotten a lot of freedom is because Blue, the team I have built, these MSPs can lean on each other. You can take a vacation and not worry about, a customer not having backup if you don't answer your phone. Our MSP partners, the leaders of those businesses, they've got backup. We let the MSPs lean on each other for that. It's just, you're in a bigger team. So you just don't have that sort of singular intensity that you have to sort of be the person always accessible. That's been big. Another component of it is when you're growing a business as an entrepreneur that did it kind of from the ground up, understanding how to build sort of advanced budgets and really sophisticated financial planning, having a team at Blue. So our CFO, our FP&A team, these extremely talented people that can help me with those things, huge. Whereas you go back 10 years, it's myself and my wife trying to figure out how to build a budget together. And I had the privilege of working with my wife for 20 years. And it was a lot of fun. We were not good at that. We didn't know how to do advanced planning and budgeting. Whereas now we have a team that can do that. So that's what I get so excited about when I talk to people who are considering joining with us. It's like, I know what they don't want to be doing. And I know what they're not doing well because I wasn't doing it well. And what Blue does is bring out wraparound support where you can focus on the things you're good at. And you've got now real backup in the things that aren't your core competency.
You just described quite a few things that tie to something you mentioned earlier, which is just the ever-present headwinds that entrepreneurs have to face in building a business. Are there other headwinds that you're finding that Blue Alliance is specifically well positioned to help your member MSPs overcome?
I'll give you a few examples. So we talked at the beginning about the different kinds of MSP integration. We're something new. We're a platform where people keep their brands, but a lot of that back office stuff we integrate. And so we can share. So think about something like compliance frameworks. So if the MSP
I'd rather not.
if the MSP industry, right, if we all need to reach a certain compliance threshold, as an example, we're pursuing high trust certification as an organization. When we achieve that, we will all achieve it together at once because we are integrated enough that we are one business. We're operating off one set of policies and procedures. We have one tech schema for the MSPs. We still operate independently. We serve customers independently. Our team members within the MSPs, they proudly wear the shirt of the brand they work for, and that's who they work for. Like, it's not, it's very real, but the places that matter, we can share. And so we can achieve high trust together. Whereas a totally disintegrated platform, very difficult, if not impossible to do because each business is still totally independent. That's one example, Matt. Another one, as MSPs, we have to evolve to serve our customers. IT is always an enabling factor for business, right? So IT needs to come into a business, align with their strategy, and support whatever their plan is. So if you're a manufacturer, or maybe you're a law firm, a healthcare organization, we need to be supporting you, which means we need to evolve to offer more services. So think about, as an MSP by yourself, if you realize, I'll give you a good example, we realize our customers need governance as a service. Like, they're all being pressured into new frameworks and new compliance standards that they have to meet. And so they're looking to us saying, help us. Well, to build that service out, either by myself, back when I was an independent MSP, or even in a disintegrated platform, it's very hard to do. Whereas at Blue, we can build that centralized governance, risk, and compliance center of excellence, and all of our MSPs can deliver and sell that service independently, but we can manage it one place. We can build the talent in one place. We don't have to try to build 25 different teams to do it. Or even sometimes more complicated, we don't need to ask our MSPs to refer that customer to somebody else, which is the other way that I've seen this happen is you'll have a partner in the family of MSPs that's like, oh, we'll send all your stuff to them. That no MSP brand wants to say you have to go outside of something we can provide you versus just providing it themselves. So that central service model is, I think, very unique. And those are two things we're addressing as a Blue Alliance family that are kind of taking some of that headwind, and just making it a non-issue.
There's a phrase that I've heard you use before, Nick, and I'm curious to pick your brain on this a little bit. I've heard you say that sometimes entrepreneurs can be their own worst enemy. What did you mean by that? I feel a little bit implicated in that, I'll be honest, because I think it's true. But what did you mean by that?
So, again, I'm speaking from my experience. So, as other entrepreneurs hear this is not an accusation. This is a confession. So, I think that's important to understand. I'm not preaching from a place of perfection. I'm speaking from a place of experience. My experience as an entrepreneur and what I've observed in friendships and collaboration with other entrepreneurs is a couple of things. Like we have this tendency to look outside of ourselves to solve big problems. So an example of that would be in the MSP world specifically, we're constantly looking for a marketing company that's going to solve our problems, an outsourced marketer. We're constantly looking for a business development solution. We're always looking for something to come and save us. And so one of the things I talk about with our CEOs inside Blue Alliance is no one is coming to save you. Like, stop waiting for it. There is no other solution. You're the solution. And that realization is not something they hear a lot. Like, it doesn't mean we shouldn't go to conferences and learn. It doesn't mean we shouldn't educate ourselves. Like, I'm not talking about stopping continuous learning. I'm talking about sometimes you just have to solve the problem. And there isn't going to be some fancy outside solution. There isn't going to be some silver bullet partner that's going to do it. You just have to figure it out. That's an example. Another example, Matt, is many entrepreneurs, myself included, we have kind of servant hearts, right? We get into service businesses because we like to serve others. Well, the flip side of that is sometimes we're not great at making tough decisions. That could be tough decisions about a customer that's being abusive. They're not respecting your people. They're not following your advice. They're not a good partner. They don't want to be a partner. Well, maybe the right thing to do is to gently exit that customer from your business. It's hard to do. And so sometimes you find they just won't do it. And that could be true of a team member. Maybe you've got a team member that's just, most entrepreneurs, if you ask them, it's like, is there somebody in your team that's toxic? They're like, immediately someone pops in their head and they're just like, I'm not dealing with it, And I've been guilty of that. And like, it's an example of where you become your own worst enemy, because now by not acting, you're hurting your team, you're creating other problems. So the notion of entrepreneurs can be their own worst enemy, Matt, another way to say it is entrepreneurs that do not have wise counsel around them will make predictable mistakes. And that's what happened to me. When I did not have wise counsel, I made predictable mistakes that made sense for my personality and the things I was good at, but they did hurt the business. They did hurt my team. Sometimes they hurt customer service. So what I like about the Blue ecosystem is I have created a model of accountability, but both for myself, but for the CEOs of our brands, and the partnership we have with our capital partner. You know, we're high accountability, high ownership, with the service being our first core value. Those things together, I think, solve that problem of being your own worst enemy.
I'm glad. I like the way you said that, Nick. I like the way you said that, Nick, because as you were talking, it struck me that it's a lot easier to be your own worst enemy when you feel isolated.
Yes.
Because sometimes we can't see the ways in which we're making decisions that are maybe detrimental to our business, to our personal life, to our marriage. But when you are living in community in business, you've got, this wise counsel that you talk about that is able to, help identify those things and right the ship.
Yeah. I love that phrase, iron sharpens iron. I work with a group of passionate entrepreneurs that want to be better tomorrow than we were today. We all want to be doing different things this time next year because we have been successful at what we're doing right now, and we've leveled up our teams and we've moved on to some new part of the adventure. If you're in a group of people like that, one, it's a lot of fun, but two, you grow from each other, you sharpen each other, you hold each other accountable. I have plenty of bad ideas, and I count on my team to help me refine those ideas. I need that. It's not that I'm going to instantly know what to do. I'm going to be better through that collaboration.
Is there anything else that I have not asked you, Nick, that you wanted to talk about today? Or do you want to go into the lightning round?
Let's do the lightning round.
I'm going to make this up as I go.
I like it. I'm ready.
Coke or Pepsi?
Coke. Easy.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars. I did pause for a second, but Star Wars.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
And
justify your response.
Is it a Cincinnati chili cheese coney?
Sure.
No, it's not a sandwich. It's a coney.
All right. How about a ballpark hot dog?
No, it's not a sandwich. Although forensically it meets the definition. I still can't call it a sandwich.
Texting or talking?
Talking. I have a strict 2-text limit, and I'm out.
What's your favorite day of the week?
Monday.
Why?
Get some. Monday. That's the first day of the week for work. I like Mondays.
The least popular answer on the board is?
Monday. I like it. It's an entrepreneur thing. I think entrepreneurs like Mondays.
What did your parents used to call you when you were little? What was your nickname?
Nikki.
Nikki.
My mom still call me today? Nikki.
That's cute.
Yeah. And then my dad for a while called me Mr. Pibb. I'm not sure if that was an homage to the soft drink or my height. I'm not sure. But
in this world of streaming, this may be an irrelevant question, but what was the last song you downloaded or the last song you listened to in the car on the way here?
Oh, I Can't Drive 55 by Sammy Hagar.
That's much cooler than mine, which was Kenny Loggins' Meet Me Halfway Across the Sky.
It's honest, though.
Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world
or
talk to animals?
Oh, talk to animals. 100% would ask my golden retriever to stop jumping on the couch. I'd negotiated a treaty of some sort with her.
Okay, this is going to be really rapid fire, and most of them will be unusable. How long does it take you to get ready in the morning?
15 minutes.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a driver are you?
11.
Fill in the blank. Taylor Swift is?
Amazing. I have 3 daughters.
If you had to choose, invisibility or super strength?
Invisibility.
Why? You sneaky?
Yeah.
You want to be.
I could be.
First celebrity crush.
Oh, Debbie Gibson.
You think you're alone now?
Out of the blue, Matt.
What's the place you most want to travel in the world that you've never been?
Oh, right now, I would love to go to Scotland.
Would you wear a kilt?
I'd be willing to do that.
Would you be willing to submit pictures?
I would be willing to submit pictures of me in a kilt with a beer in Scotland.
Favorite junk food?
Big Mac.
Favorite childhood TV show?
Oh, Captain Caveman. Easy. Remember that guy? He had everything in he was the first entrepreneur. He had everything in his little fur. Whatever he needed was there.
I know you're a big Halloween guy. Favorite Halloween costume that you have personally worn?
Oh, Tooth Fairy. That was a hit. You remember that
I remember that one.
A lot of people remember that one.
Yeah, it's burned into my brain.
I'm sorry.
Say a word in Spanish other than hola.
Cerveza.